On today's episode of the CLS Experience, we have a very delicious treat. He's a cardiologist, heart surgeon, dynamic medical researcher, and best-selling author, no big deal. He's on a massive mission to improve health, happiness, and longevity through a unique vision of human nutrition. He's performed countless heart transplants and has developed life-saving medical technology, just to name a few. He's an invaluable resource to people all over the world, and he's literally extending lives. He's just a juggernaut in all facets of life and a phenomenal human being. Please welcome the innovative, charismatic, brilliant, and trailblazing, the handsome Dr. Steven Gundry. How you doing, Doc?
Oh, geez, I thought you were talking about somebody else who was coming on the program. I don't deserve any of that.
Do you feel elevated? Did I do right by you with the intro?
Oh, yeah. I'm reminded of Mark Twain was introduced with some glowing remarks one time, and he said, Samuel Clemens, he says, I really don't deserve all that, but I have arthritis and I don't really deserve that either. So, okay.
What a good perspective. But like I always say, it's your story. You wrote it. I just said it. Sometimes it's nice to hear it back.
Good point. But
yeah,
and we're always writing the story, I hope so.
Yeah, it never ends. And you and I probably could have chatted for 3 hours before we hit record, but at some point we're like, we should probably save this juicy stuff for the show. I want to say to the audience, we're about 3 million now. In case you're not familiar with Dr. Gundry, do a deep dive, read his books, check out his social media, his content, his website, play catch up. What I think is most valuable today is we just have an unbelievable conversation. Before we dive in, we're going to get a little weird. You ready for me, Doc?
I'm ready. Let's go.
What is your superpower?
I've been described both in surgery and in my, current profession as a nutritionist, as somebody who flies at 30,000 feet and is able to bring a much wider perspective than at ground eye level. So that may be my superpower.
That's a great one. And I've asked some of the world's greatest, and I never heard it articulated quite like that. Isn't that everything? A perspective, just looking at things from a different angle?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite small short stories, and anybody can pull it up, is the invasion of the pattern matchers. Ooh. And one of the things that's fascinating to me is that all life is based on pattern matching. And that is, we match patterns that we see with our eyes and match what that means with our ears. Believe it or not, every communication that happens between a cell is involving a pattern that it recognizes and it gives information. Believe it or not, more and more we're realizing that the microbiome, all the little bugs that live inside of us and on us, actually send out information that we were unable to recognize up until a few years ago. And now we realize that there's an entire communication system between all these little one-celled animals, creatures in us, and our mitochondria, our DNA. I just got back from one of the big microbiome meetings that happens every year in Paris, where I was presenting last week. And lo and behold, they've now discovered that messenger RNA from bacteria penetrates the wall of our gut and communicates to our DNA, to our cells, in a language that we couldn't have even fathomed would have existed. So everything involves pattern matching.
So true, and beautifully articulated as usual with you. It's crazy to think how far we've advanced in technology, and the reality is we're just getting warmed up. Of all the things that you've seen throughout your journey, what excites you most right now about where we're at going forward, about technology and all this stuff?
Well, I think we've talked for, I guess, a number of years about personalized medicine. And and I think it started with gadgets like an Oura ring, for instance.
How is that, by the way? I was looking into that.
Yeah, so actually, I just had the chief scientific officer on Oura Ring on my podcast yesterday. So it'll be available. I was one of the original adapters. It was a big clunky thing. This is generation 3. Generation 4, the computer program will be downloaded pretty shortly. But long story short, these were the first attempt at putting data onto, for instance, your sleep patterns, your exercise patterns. And sometimes we become overly focused on this data. Give you a funny story. When I get up in the morning, my wife said, we'll go, how'd you sleep? And I'll go, well, just a minute. I got to check my Oura Ring. And she said, what do you mean? How'd you sleep? And I said, I don't know, until I check it. And that's really kind of stupid, although we got into that in the discussion, that in fact, a lot of times we're really unaware of the intricacies of patterns of sleep and that these things pick it up. But getting back to personalized medicine, I think we're shortly entering the period of time where, number one, we can do a genomic map of us. We can do a bacterial, fungal map of our gut bugs. But now we're beginning to get to the point where we're realizing that there are certain products that one bacteria makes that another bacteria needs to eat to get to the second product that's really important for instance, avoiding depression, just as an example. And very shortly, we're going to get to the point where we're going to be able to craft the combination of bacteria, what they want to eat, what they need to eat, what they're going to interact with your genes, and pretty much pick all the pieces out to have you have a great health span as well as a great lifespan. And it's closer than we think, but we're still really scratching the surface. And that's actually really exciting.
I was about, first of all, this is gripping stuff, and the audience should run that back. And I was about to say, we're only scratching the surface. That excites me. And we're just getting started.
Can I give you a thing I learned last week?
Sure.
All right. So there was a Japanese researcher there, and he says, everybody knows the Japanese are skinny. And there's lots of theories why the Japanese are skinny, that they stop eating after they're 80% full, or their portion size is tiny, or, they're moving, or they're meditating all the time, and blah, blah, blah. And all those may be important. He said, but we've discovered that there's a particular bacterium that lives in the guts of Japanese that really doesn't live very much in other people. And that this particular bacteria makes some compounds that, number one, actually makes you not hungry. And number two, actually hits some of our hormone receptors that makes you lose weight. And you go, whoa, I need some of that. How do I get some of that? Well, not so fast. It turns out that this particular bug likes to eat certain things to accomplish this. And it just so happens that this bug likes some of the sugar molecules in seaweed. And what do the Japanese eat?
Seaweed.
A lot of seaweed. So you start seeing, several layers of, okay, how did this come about? And each piece has to fall into place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great share, great story. And also patterns, right?
Yeah. In fact, on the same line of thinking, the Japanese are one of the few people who are able to actually digest all the components of seaweed. And that's because through the years, by eating so much sushi and raw seafood, that they acquired bacteria from the fish they ate. And those bacteria were able to digest algae and seaweed in the guts of the fish. And the Japanese acquired that by eating lots of raw fish. Most of us don't have those bacteria because most of us don't eat a whole lot of raw fish. So
that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge you for a second, and the audience can tell in 2 seconds. It's so contagious how passionate you are about this stuff, because you light up when you're speaking about it. And it's no wonder you're one of the world leaders in this. I know the audience is dying to hear this one. I'm just going to come out right and ask you, how bad is sugar, Doc?
Oh, sugar is delicious. I mean, we've been designed really from day one to seek out sugar. And way back a long time ago, the only sugar that was available was the sugar in fruit, fructose. And it was only available once a year during the summer and early fall in fruit season. And believe it or not, even in the jungle, fruit only ripens once a year. And we are sugar-seeking apes. Fun fact, the only animals that have true color vision are animals that are fruit predators. And because the plant wants to tell you by the color of their fruit that that fruit is ripe, it has the highest sugar content, and its seeds are protected from digestion, and go at it. We want to know that information because we want to get the maximum sugar content out of something we see. Our dogs, for instance, don't have our color vision because they don't really care whether a squirrel is gray or red or black. It cares if it's moving. And if it's moving, it's something to eat. It's looking for a moving pattern. It's pattern matching. We're looking for patterns of colors that tell us that sugar's ready. So getting back to your question, when table sugar became available, which was really only a couple hundred years ago, then table sugar is half glucose and half fructose. It's sucrose. It hits every sensory pleasure on our tongue, and our brain says, oh my gosh, you just got the mother load of what's going to keep us alive and fatten us up for the winter. Get as much as you can and keep doing it. We cannot reprogram our brain to think that there should be a limit to this stuff. And as I write about in others, we know that a rat will turn down heroin and cocaine if it's offered sugar instead. It will always press the button for sugar and say, heroin and morphine, can do without it.
That's crazy concept. Crazy concept. People are addicted to sugar.
Yeah, I mean, it just hits all the right buttons, and those are the buttons that we have to be aware of so that we can say, hey, look, any white powder is an addictive substance. You can start with that and pretty much realize that that's a universal truth.
Understood. Yeah, this is very informative, educational, and obviously entertaining as well. Some foods that people may not be aware of that they should start to consider eliminating from their diet. What do you got?
Well, so one of the biggest mischief makers in our current diet is white flour or things that are made with white flour. For instance, most people don't realize that a plain old piece of bread has 4 teaspoons of sugar in it. Now, you don't taste it. It's there, I guarantee you.
4 teaspoons?
4 teaspoons.
Wow.
4 teaspoons of sugar. A bagel has about 12 teaspoons of sugar. That's a bagel. That's a lot of sugar.
A lot.
And people go, wait a minute, there's no sugar in a bagel. Well, it's simple carbohydrates. And these simple carbohydrates are actually more mischievous in a lot of ways than a teaspoon of sugar.
Wow.
Because they are broken down instantly in our digestion system and absorbed faster than we can break down table sugar, for example. I mean, it's like mainline sugar, and yet it's healthy. And that's one of the big culprits I see. I still see patients 6 days a week, and even on the weekends. And one of the big mistakes people make is thinking that, well, I eat organic sourdough bread. Well, I'm sorry, even if it's organic, it's still basically you're having sugar. One of the other sad things is that long ago, when we were eating sugary containing things like fruits and even vegetables, they came with a generous amount of fiber, indigestible stuff that you and I can't digest, but are essential for the other half of us, our gut microbiome. And what we've done in our world, in the Western diet, is we pretty much eliminated all the fiber that came with all these things we were eating. And now we just have the raw material, which is basically sugar. And what I've written about in multiple of my books is you absorb all that sugar, and back in the good old days, another load of undigestible sugar, carbohydrates, went down and fed the gut buddies, as I call them, the microbiome. And so everybody was winning. Now we get the sugar, but the gut microbiome doesn't get anything. And one of the fascinating things, and this was recently proven in China, is we wonder where our hunger sensations come from. The original theory was that if your stomach shrunk, you were hungry, but if your stomach got full, then you weren't hungry anymore. And fun story, years ago, they had men and women swallow a balloon on a little tube, and it went down their stomach, and they'd start pumping air into the balloon. And when the balloon got to be about the size of an orange, the women would start going, oh, I'm so full. Oh, stop. I'm so full. You had to get a basketball in a guy. And then even the guys going, oh yeah, love that feeling. Oh yeah, more. Yeah. So the stretch theory actually went by the wayside when we discovered some hunger and hunger suppressant hormones that the gut neurons make. And then some really smart Chinese researchers said, well, wait a minute. The gut bacteria actually know what they want to eat. And we know that there are obesogenic gut bacteria. We can put obesogenic gut bacteria into people or into mice. And you can take skinny mice and make them fat. You can make skinny people, make them fat. And vice versa. You can put skinny bacteria into people or mice and make them skinny. So these guys said, well, maybe the bacteria are sending messages about whether they're full and happy. So they took some guys and they put them on either a 7 or 14-day water fast. All they got to eat. Half of the group, that's a long time, 14 days.
Sure.
One group got 100 calories of prebiotic fiber that was totally undigestible for them. And 100 calories, the other group got nothing. The group that got the prebiotic fiber, what bacteria like to eat, had absolutely no hunger throughout 14 days of water fast. The group that had the water fast were hungry. They did fine, but they had a sense of being hungry. And so it's actually, I think, I like the theory, the gut-centric theory of hunger, that our hunger actually comes from our bacteria wanting what they need to eat. So getting back to why we're all so fat, one of the reasons we're all so fat, and we always are feeding our face, is the stuff we're eating never feeds the real inhabitants of our gut, which is our gut microbiome. And they're going, what the heck? You know, you just ate the Subway sandwich and 4 slices of pizza, and you didn't give me anything to eat. I can't use any of that stuff. You know, go find some more stuff.
Yeah, it's so interesting. First of all, you're an unbelievable storyteller. I got to tell you. And second of all, like, I think most people probably don't think about this stuff, right? Or they don't take the time to get informed. It's one of the reasons why, besides because I'm such a fan, is one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on, is because this is literally going to change lives, or like you do, extend lives. And we just talked about a couple of foods that people should consider eliminating. On the flip side, what are some foods that people might not be familiar with that they should consider adding to their diet and nutrition?
Yeah, that's a great point. I got to know Jack LaLanne, who I feel is the godfather of fitness later on in his life. And Jack LaLanne used to have an expression: if it tastes good, spit it out. And my handlers always tell me, don't say that. They'll think that you want people to eat, you know, things that don't taste good. And I said, no. He really wasn't saying that. He was basically saying is, if you eat for them, the microbiome, then they'll take care of you. And what I've tried to structure is we want people to eat food they love, but that loves them back. And so the more we can actually eat for the 99% of all the cells that exist in our body, which are not human cells, they're these bacteria. If we eat for them, all sorts of cool things happen. Now, it's actually pretty easy to eat for them. So we're talking about simplistically prebiotic fibers. And these are, again, fibers that we don't digest, but that are eaten by the gut bacteria. There's a class of vegetables that have one of the best prebiotic fibers. It's called inulin. And you can even buy inulin powder. It's a sweetener. And inulin is contained in the chicory family of vegetables. Now, most of us have seen radicchio, which some people call the Italian red lettuce. It's not a lettuce, it's a chicory. It's in most grocery stores. Years ago, I noticed, particularly traveling in south of France and in Italy, I never had a salad, excuse me for a second,
Sure,
that didn't have radicchio in it. And it was also very unusual to have a salad that didn't have other forms of chicory, like frisee, like Belgian endive. These are all chicory. And I'm going, you know, that's funny. I wonder why these guys eat this. And then you start looking at what it does, and it actually feeds good gut bacteria, and it tastes delicious. So, and it's an easy thing to do. You go buy one of these things and, you know, throw it in your salad, and you'll start feeding your gut bacteria. The other thing I joke is that I want most people to be a gorilla who lives in Italy. And by that, I mean,
I heard you talk about this. This is great.
Gorillas eat about 16 pounds of leaves and twigs every day. And gorillas will have more muscle than you and I will ever imagine. And they got all their muscle by eating leaves. And they are just a giant fermentation vat for their gut microbiome. And when I say a gorilla who lives in Italy, I like people to try and get about 1 liter of olive oil per week into their mouth. And my thinking is the only purpose of food is to get olive oil into your mouth. So how do you do that? You become a gorilla who lives in Italy, and you know, everything will take care of itself.
What an awesome analogy. And it's crazy how muscular those guys are, the gorilla.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they're fat because they have this, you know, giant belly. But that belly is actually, they have basically a fermentation vat in their gut, where their gut microbiome eats all these leaves. and produces proteins for them, produces everything else for them.
Yeah.
And we forget that.
This is awesome. Only negative I got going on is we don't have 10 hours to chat, but I have a feeling it's just the beginning of the friendship. We're going to pivot and segue into keto, right? And your latest book, The Keto Code, is a monster hit. It's changing the world. And keto's been around for a little bit, and I know sometimes it's trendy, but I'm sure there's some listeners out there right now that want to maybe get involved, but they don't even really know what that means, the keto diet. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the keto diet has been around since 1930. It was actually developed, yeah, 1930. It was developed at the Mayo Clinic to treat childhood seizure disorders. And this was before there were any drugs for treating seizures like phenobarbital, Dilan.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids would have such, incessant seizures that they would actually basically kind of be in a coma, and they wouldn't eat for days. And when they didn't eat for days and they came out of their coma, their parents would go, oh, they're awake. Let's give them something to eat. And as soon as they gave them something to eat, they start having seizures. And so working with some doctors at Harvard, the Mayo Clinic guys say, when they're not eating, they're producing these compounds that are called ketones, ketone bodies. And we know that ketone bodies can actually go to the brain very easily. And maybe these ketone bodies are doing something to the brain that's preventing these seizures. And that's why when these kids are starving, their seizures go away. And the minute mom and dad feed them, their seizures come back. So the only other way that was known to produce ketones is your liver will manufacture them when either you're starving or you're really not eating very many proteins and carbohydrates, and you're basically living on fat. And fatty acids can be taken to the liver and be turned into ketones. Now, why bother to do that? Well, fatty acids can be burned as a fuel in all of our muscles, all of our cells, except they're too big to get into the brain. And so ketones are little tiny things. They're a type of fat, but they're so small that they can get into the brain. So when people started doing this, lo and behold, the kids' seizures went away, and it became really the treatment for seizure disorders in children for a very long time until these drugs came out. And then it pretty much died a horrible death. Fast forward to the 90s, and researchers primarily at Harvard and at the NIH, and I was at the NIH in the 90s as a researcher, they said, we need to look at these ketones because I think these ketones are more important than just keeping the brain alive. And so they started looking at maybe ketones are some kind of super fuel. And there was a big movement. One of the researchers got on the cover of Time magazine that ketones are a super fuel and we should always try to be in ketosis. Well, not so fast. Students of these researchers then looked at human volunteers on a ketogenic diet. And lo and behold, they found that at full ketosis, only 30% of the energy needs were met by ketones. The rest was done with free fatty acids and glucose. And even the brain, which supposedly loves ketones, even at full ketosis, the brain still wanted 30 to 40% of its fuel as sugar, as glucose. So when I saw that data, I said, well, wait a minute. This isn't a super fuel. And yet we know that people who follow a ketogenic diet have some really good outcomes. They lose weight. They feel better. They're mentally sharper. What's the deal if these aren't some super fuel? Well, I stumbled across a paper, a short paper, written by a PhD by the name of Martin Brand in the year 2000. And it's got a cool name, and it's an actually pretty easy read, called Uncoupling to Survive. Now, people hear the word uncoupling and they think about Gwyneth Paltrow, perhaps uncoupling from her former marriage. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that mitochondria are the little energy producing organelles in almost all of our cells. And everybody remembers them from high school biology. They were that little kind of squiggly thing in the cell diagram that almost looked like it was a radiator. And there was one in the cell. Well, there can be thousands of mitochondria in our cells, packed in there, producing ATP. And making ATP, the energy currency, is incredibly hard work. It's literally accomplishing a nuclear reaction in mitochondria. And I go into it in depth on how this happens. And I think I humorously describe it as one of the hottest nightclubs in town, the Mito Club, where everybody's trying to couple. You go to the club to couple. Well, it's hard work. It's hot and steamy in there. And you've got to kind of blow off steam in these clubs. And there really ought to be emergency exits to blow off steam. And lo and behold, it was discovered that mitochondria, to protect themselves, have these escape hatches, emergency exits, where they can blow off steam. And what Martin Brand discovered was, if you're starving to death, if there's a signal that you're starving to death, then mitochondria ought to protect themselves at all costs, because if the mitochondria dies, that's it. You got to have them to make energy, and they'll protect themselves. And he proposed that they uncouple, they blow off lots of steam so that they don't have to work very hard. And then he went on to show that you look at super old people, 105 years old, who are thriving, they're chasing their goats up the hill in Sardinia. And these people have the most uncoupled mitochondria of anybody. So uncoupling to survive says, hey, uncoupling my mitochondria, having them blow off steam probably is a really good idea. And I wonder if that's what ketones are signaling mitochondria to do. In other words, is that the pattern that the mitochondria are looking for? And lo and behold, it is. So that's why ketones work so well. Now, we've established that, but are there other patterns? Are there other substances that can accomplish the same thing without eating, quite frankly, a really boring high-fat diet? I mean, everybody's tried it. 60% of people who go on a high-fat diet quit after a month because, how many pounds of butter with a cheddar cheese chaser and a pile of bacon can you eat every day before you just can't take it any longer? And so what I and others have found is that there's a whole host of compounds that have been known about literally for millennia that accomplish the same thing at a much easier way to do it. Yeah. So I'll stop there for a second.
Yeah, this first of all, this is awesome. I'm learning so much, so thank you. A lot of people, I think there's a lot of opinions about keto, but I imagine very few actually know what you just explained to us. What are some of the big misconceptions that you see in regards to keto?
Well, at the start of the book, I actually have a bunch of quotes that I took directly out of famous keto books, and I actually have them lined up in my shelf. And they are so wrong that Now, it's humorous. Like, for instance, the liver makes ketones out of free fatty acids, but the liver can't use ketones. And so it actually just throws them out. One of the books says the liver loves ketones and the liver needs ketones. And it's like, well, actually, no, the liver doesn't love ketones and the liver can't use ketones. One of my favorites is ketones are a clean burning fuel and sugar is a dirty fuel. No, a fuel is a fuel. And, you'll get the same amount of ATP production out of free fatty acids as you will with sugar, and you won't have any additional soot or waste like diesel fuel somehow. So these are all absolutely misconceptions. And I think the biggest misconception is that you have to have a high-fat diet to produce ketones, or to produce these signaling molecules that tell mitochondria to uncouple. One of the easiest ways, and you do not have to follow a high-fat diet, is intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. And
very trendy these days.
Very trendy these days. But there's a really important proviso on how to do intermittent fasting properly. There's a beautiful Italian athlete study that was published a few years ago. They took Italian cyclists and they divided them into two groups, and they all had to eat at a training table. Everybody kind of knows what that is. For 3 months, they all had to eat the exact same food. They had a vigorous, cycling training program. The only difference between the two groups was the amount of time they got to spend eating. So one group had a 12-hour eating window and a 12-hour window where they didn't eat. Now, the good news is that sleep can account for some of that non-eating window. Sure. So these guys had breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning, lunch at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and had to finish dinner by 8 o'clock at night. A 12-hour eating window. The other group had a 7-hour eating window. They had to eat the same food, but they had to eat it in 7 hours. They had break fast, and the definition of breakfast is breaking your fast, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the first time they ate. They had lunch at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they had to finish dinner by 8 o'clock at night. So that was a 7-hour eating window. So then they looked at what happened to these guys. All of them ate the same food, the same amount of food. The group with the 7-hour eating window lost weight. They got more cut. They didn't lose any muscle mass.
Wow.
Group with the 12-hour eating window didn't lose any weight, even though they were both eating the same food and exercising exactly the same. But the real punchline, what interested me, was we use a measurement of how long you're going to live and how long you're going to live well, called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. And the athletes with the shortened window of eating, their insulin-like growth factor 1 plummeted. And that's a really good thing. If you look at super old people, they have low insulin-like growth factors. If you look at people who develop cancer, they have high insulin-like growth factors.
Really?
The group that ate in the 12-hour window didn't change their insulin-like growth factor at all. So what's going on? Well, it turns out that ketone production starts after about 8 hours after your last meal. You begin to start making ketones. So the athletes with the 12-hour eating window, they had 4 hours of ketones before they ate again, and then they stopped their ketone production. So they had a little bit of talk to your mitochondria and uncouple, but not much. The group with the 7-hour window, they actually had an additional 5 hours of making ketones. So they had 9 hours of making ketones. And so they were telling their mitochondria to repair themselves over a longer period of time. And they were telling their mitochondria to literally waste fuel. With the gas prices the way they are, most of us would like to conserve fuel. And if we had any sense, we'd all be buying Toyota Priuses or, a high mileage car. And if we had any sense, the last thing we would buy is a Ferrari, which is really good at wasting fuel. Now, there might be a reason that you and I and most of us listening would want a Ferrari, but it certainly wouldn't be to save gas. What we know now is that this technique actually tells your mitochondria to become Ferraris, to become high performance machines that waste gas, that waste fat. And that's why these guys actually got healthier and they actually lost weight, whereas the other guys didn't.
Wow. This is great stuff, straight up. Mind-blowing, if I'm being honest. So what is your routine right now in regards to nutrition?
Well, interesting. As far as I know, I was the first person in a popular book to write about time-restricted eating with my first book back in the early 2000s.
I believe it.
Excuse me. And I had been practicing time-restricted eating during the winter. From January through June, I only eat one meal a day. It's called the OMAD diet. And you eat all your calories in a 2-hour time window. I eat mine between 5 and 7 o'clock at night. So that 22 out of 24 hours, I'm fasting. Now, I do that during the week, and then I break it up on weekends and have 2 meals. And I've been doing that now for over 20 years. And, so far, so good. The easiest way to do it that I teach my patients is, look, get into a 6 to 8 hour eating window. And I take people through the book how to do it easily. And do that during the week. On the weekends, relax. And there's actually cool data out of Chicago showing that if you do it 5 days a week and relax 2 days a week, you'll actually get the same benefits as if you did it all 7 days.
Really?
I want people who can find a program that they can live with, literally and physically. And
more
so,
of a lifestyle than a diet.
Yeah, it's not a diet. And so this is a lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle that has been shown in humans, in animals, in rats, that this is something that, will have measurable benefits in terms of health. And so if something as simple as, skipping breakfast is a way to achieve that, then, why not? And, people say, oh, well, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And, I got to have breakfast before I work out. I got to have my protein shake so I can build muscle. Well, in fact, the exact opposite is true. Do we really think our ancestors crawled out of the cave and said, what's for breakfast? There wasn't any breakfast. We didn't have refrigeration. We didn't have storage systems. You had to find breakfast. And that was frequently later in the morning, and you may not have found breakfast for several days. And so that's the natural design that we have. And the more we, embrace that natural design, the better.
So true. This is great stuff. A couple more nuggets until we land the plane. Is it true that different people have different metabolisms and are able to digest differently and so forth, and maybe carry more or less weight?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. It turns out that probably the more we're learning about the microbiome, the more we're realizing that people who seem to be able to eat almost everything that they want and stay skinny don't have a faster metabolism, but they have a hungrier microbiome that eats more of the food that they're ingesting and doesn't pass it on to them. I'll give you a great example that I've had used in my books. There was a report in the British Medical Journal a few years ago of a woman marathoner who developed a very serious infection in her colon called C. difficile. And a lot of people have heard of C. diff. And it's a life-threatening problem. When I was in medical school in the dark ages, we actually, at our university at Georgia, discovered that if you gave a fecal transplant, a fecal enema to someone with C. difficile, that you would cure C. difficile. And the reason I remember it so well is that medical students were the donors for these fecal enemas. And once a week, we had to take a crap in a bucket, and one of our professors would put it in a Waring blender, serious, and put it in an enema bag and shove it up somebody's ass with C. difficile. And it worked. And people thought he was crazy, but it worked. And that's now the standard of treatment for C. difficile. So getting back to the story, we like to have a person who's a close relative be the donor. And I won't go into why, but this lady had a niece who lived nearby, but she was about 30 pounds overweight. But she was a living related donor, and so the niece gave her her feces, and she got it, and she survived. Over the next year, even though she returned to marathoning, she gained 30 pounds, eating the same way. And you go, well, what the heck? Her bacteria from her obese niece were now her bacteria, and they were really good at extracting the calories and pushing them into her rather than keeping it for themselves. And this has now been proven in rat studies. I mean, you can take skinny rats and give them feces from fat humans, and they will become fat, even though they're eating the same amount of food. Right. So it's, it's like, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not in control of what I thought I was in control. That these little, singular celled organisms are controlling my weight, my mood. I mean, we now know that depression and anxiety almost absolutely is coming from the gut microbiome. It's not from up here. You don't need a checkup from the neck up. You need a checkup from the diaphragm down.
Now that's where we would drop the mic. This is dynamite. So much wisdom today. And I want to acknowledge you again. You just have, no pun intended, a really good way of making this stuff digestible.
Very good.
We'll land the plane with this. I got to ask you, what's a good way to make our coffee a little bit healthier?
Yeah, that's a great idea. First of all, one of the ways of making ketones without any effort is MCT oil, medium chain triglycerides. And MCT oil, you can find it in Costco. It's so popular now. MCT oil is flavorless, it's colorless, and you can put it in coffee. My good friend Dave Asprey made bulletproof coffee. I have told him he stole the idea from my first book, but hey, that's okay. And try not to put butter in it, believe it or not. You're much better off taking MCT oil and get ready for this, goat cheese or sheep cheese or goat yogurt or sheep yogurt along with MCT oil in your coffee. It's going to be much better for you than butter. And because MCTs are 30% of all the fats in goat and sheep products. And I call it a capracino in the book, because capra is the Latin word for goat. And all of the MCT oils have caproic acid, caprylic acid. They're all named after the goat.
I love this. I couldn't help but notice that you were taking a sip out of something throughout the conversation. What do you got in that thermos?
Green tea.
There it
I
is.
have, I drink about 5 different varieties of tea every day. The reason I do that is that both coffee and tea contain uncoupling compounds that uncouple my mitochondria, whether I'm eating a high-fat diet or not, whether I'm, not eating during the day. And anytime we can get these uncoupling compounds into us, the better. Here's something to take away. These uncoupling compounds, their health benefits have been known for millennia. They didn't know why they were important. The 3 wise men brought 3 gifts to the little baby Jesus. They brought gold, pretty good idea, but they brought frankincense and myrrh. Remember, we had to remember all that? What the heck? They're bringing resins and a spice to the little baby Jesus. Well, it turns out that frankincense and myrrh are mitochondrial uncoupling compounds. And who would have known that these things would be so prized for their health benefits? In fact, the spice trade in the Middle Ages was the drug trade of the Middle Ages. And all of these spices, we now know, work by uncoupling mitochondria. And I want my mitochondria uncoupling.
This is great. You're such a stud. I want to ask you, I know that you love to hike. Do you also work out?
Yeah. I like to do strength training, but I like to spend my time on my lower legs and butt. And I really urge my patients, 60% of our muscle mass is in our butt and our thighs. So, get off the treadmill. That's a waste of time. One of the reasons I like hiking, anytime you're working against gravity, whether you're going up or going down, you're using your lower legs. And spend time on, if you're at the gym, spend time on the leg machines. That's really where the action is. Yeah, I know you want this for show, but the action is down in your lower leg.
Understood.
And I do Pilates. I think Pilates is a great way to incorporate core stability and flexibility. We see a lot of really muscle-bound guys come in and start taking Pilates, and they're working up a sweat like, what the heck? And you're going, wait a minute, you're a big, strong guy. What are you sweating for? Because they're engaging an entirely different part of their body that they just never worked. So
makes so much sense.
I like to mix it up.
Love that. The audience is now 3 million on the show. They're very engaged, very loyal. We're going to drop this episode soon. You and I will keep in touch. What's the best way for the community to support you, Doc?
Well, come visit me at my 2 websites, drgundry.com, gundrymd.com, which is my supplement and food company. I've got the Dr. Gundry podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcast. And I got 2 YouTube channels. Hopefully I'm appearing in some advertisement on whatever site you're looking at, if I'm doing everything right. So hopefully it's pretty easy to find me.
I love it. What kind of guests do you typically have on your podcast?
Well, I mean, for instance, just yesterday, we recorded the chief scientific officer of the Oura Ring, the tracking device that I have worn since its inception. We just had one of the world's expert on a really fascinating bug in your gut called Akkermansia muciniphila. And yeah, say that 3 times fast. And it may be one of the holy grails to have great long-term health that nobody's ever heard about. So, and you can now buy it. I don't have any relationship with them, but those are the sort of people.
You really are awesome. I love this. How can I personally support you, Doc?
Get the word out, spread the word that, the sad thing is, we joke about this, but sickness is good for business. And big food, big pharma, big medicine all want to conspire to have us sick, and they need us sick. And don't buy into this. We're not supposed to be, when we're 70 years old, on 7 prescription medications, which is what the average 70-year-old in this country takes.
Wow.
7 prescriptions. I don't take any, nor does my wife. And we're both 72.
You're 72?
Yeah.
You're doing something really right, because you look about 42 tops.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking to this scientist at the Aura Ring, and there's a fascinating thing that people really should follow called blanking on it for a second. It's actually heart rate variability. And we're actually our heart rhythm, most people think lub dub, it's nice and regular. In fact, if you use a computer, there are really tiny fractions of a second intervals between beats that vary. And the more variable that heart rate variability is, quite frankly, the longer you're going to live and live well. It's usually pretty doggone variable as we're young, but it gets less and less variable as we get older. And I was involved in a study years ago in that exact, you literally, as your heart rate variability goes down, that's the end. It predicts your death. So we're talking about my heart rate variability. I said, yeah, mine, usually runs about 70 to 80. And he goes, what? I said, yeah, 70 to 80. He says, but you're 72 years old. You ought to be down, in the 20s. He said, are you sure? I said, yeah. And I said, when my wife and I are out hiking, doing 10 miles in the hills, it goes up to 150, 170. And he said, what? And I said, yeah. He says, wow, I want to know what you're doing, because, those are impossible numbers. And you're right. It's like Jack LaLanne said, I can't die, it'd be bad for business.
That's the best closing line of all time. This was too much fun. Hang out for 1 second. I just want to connect with you offline. Doc, I wanted you to know you're the definition of perspective, wisdom, and nutrition, from taking your life experience to spreading positivity, light, and deep truths. You're a true visionary, role model, and beacon of hope for anybody coming up today with big goals and aspirations. I could personally guarantee your best is yet to come. Keep on spreading your wings and leaving your mark on this world. So much love and respect for you. Thank you so much for stopping by and dropping these priceless nuggets today.
Well, thanks a lot, Greg. Yeah, great to see you again.
That was too much fun. Great conversation, Doc.
Well, good.
Yeah, that was awesome. I'd love to continue the friendship, and the brand is exploding. Anything I could do I know you're already out there, but anything that I can contribute to add to get the message out, I'm here for you.
Well, and hey, if you find somebody that, number one, needs help, you got a star or a celebrity, send them our way. We've turned a lot of celebrities have autoimmune diseases, have gut issues, and we've turned a number of them around that they didn't think anything could be done. And so I'm always happy to reach out for anybody who needs help.
Yeah, my network is full of them. I will definitely send them your way. Do you run your own Instagram? Is that you on there, or you have like a team?
Well, the team puts it up, but I put up my stuff on Instagram all the time.
All right, cool. Well,
yeah.
I know we're connected on there anyway, but we'll continue to connect. Probably drop this episode in the next month or so, and then I'll message you and I'll invite you as a collaborator so my whole audience could see it as well. I'm just looking forward to building a friendship for sure. You ever come out to New York?
Yeah, actually, we're going to be in New York for 4 days, flying in the day after Christmas, the 26th.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's business. Working on the next book, and HarperCollins is my publisher. So spending some time, putting things together. It's working with the editor.
Yeah.
I have to write a lot more than makes it to the book, because I think this is my this would be my 8th book with her. And I have to write about 30% more in each book, because I know she has to cut 30% of what I write. So
we just got a big book deal too. Just announced it with Wiley. So I'm about to start the book now. Any advice or any suggestions to really get in the zone?
You know, I love to procrastinate, but when try to put aside a time that you dedicate to writing. I often find some of my best writing is actually late at night.
Really?
Yeah. One book, we were in Italy for a few weeks, and I swear I wrote most of the book at night while my wife was sleeping, just getting inspiration from my surroundings. So
you write on a laptop?
Yep.
I love it. Cool. If there's any time when you're in New York, I'd love to grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah, let's see if we can put it together.
Let's exchange numbers.
Yeah. Here, I'll give you my phone number right now.
Okay.